All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on what services do the NRENs need to provide. There will, as usual, be three presentations in this section. They're about product management and end-user support, approaches to those and how to tackle the challenges in those areas. The first presentation is going to be by Walter van Dijk, who's the head of the Account Advising Department at Surfnet, the Dutch NREN. And he's going to present a model for lifecycle and portfolio management from an NREN perspective.
Just put it in my trousers, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Dale, for the introduction. My name is indeed Walter van Dijk, work for Surfnet in the Netherlands. And today, this afternoon, I would like to present a model that we recently developed, that is last year and part of this year for lifecycle and product management. It's developed from an NREN perspective, which makes it different from models, similar models that are being used within commercial companies. And the talk will revolve about these issues. I'll first start with a short introduction on Surfnet, the company that is, as well as on the services that we provide to our constituency. I'll then go into the ratio that we see for having a policy on lifecycle and portfolio management. After that, I'll present the model. That is the model as it is right now, because it's still under development. And I'll conclude with some remarks, some first experiences that we have gained over the last year. So first, a short introduction, like I said, on Surfnet. Surfnet is the Dutch National Research and Education Network. It's a not-for-profit company. It's fully owned by the Surf Foundation, and it has some 180 connected organizations, connected institutions, as well as some 800,000 end users. And I'm aware of the fact that in the previous presentation from my colleague Elise Roders, some other figures were mentioned. I believe she talked about 170 institutions and 750,000 of end users. So probably we grew a little over the last 15 minutes, but never mind. These are the rough figures. Turnover, I'm quite sure about that figure because it's in our annual report, was 34 million euro last year, which is quite a large sum considering the amount of connected institutions, and not all of this turnover is being paid. Is being charged to our customers. A large part of it comes from the government, as well as from a number of commercial organizations that we partner with in building the network. So if you look at in the infrastructure services that we provide, the network that we provide, the basic concept is that innovation of the network, and that includes the building of new generations of the network, is being paid for by the government in the Netherlands. That's the national government, whereas the cost of the exploitation, both of the network and of the services that we provide, is being paid by the users. And well, like I said, it's about 50-50. Not completely 50-50, because like I said, there's also some organizations, commercial organizations that we cooperate with in building the next generation of our network. The current generation, Surfnet 5, has been built with Cisco and Cisco Systems and BT, British Telecom, and a new generation that we're currently building and that should become operational on 1 July this year will be built in cooperation with Nortel from Canada, Avicii Systems from the US, and Telindus, a Belgium Dutch firm, and they're contributing also financially to this new network. So which services do we provide? Well, of course, we provide, like each NREN, network services. That's still the main services that we do provide. We try to standardize. We have been trying so for the last 3 years on 1 gig IP connections. At this moment, as we speak, we have 162 1 gig IP connections of those 180, which is quite a huge number, I think. And we've got 3 10 gig connections. And then the other 15, we're trying to get rid of those. That's basically legacy-based connections based on leased lines, ATM connections, SDH connections. And like I said, we're trying to standardize this on these 2 types of IP connections. And these will be the only ones that we will see into the new network, which, like I said, will become operational about a month from now. This new network, ServNet 6, will also provide a new service on the network layer, which we call light paths. The network will be a DWDM-based network, and that provides us with the possibility to deliver light paths to our institutions, to the universities, for instance. But also there we try to standardize on those two type of connections. It's either 1 gig or 10 gig, and in both cases, and that goes also for the IP connections, the interface is always Ethernet. And we know there's a huge demand for IP connections. That's our raison d'etre, you could say. Whether that's also going to be the case for light paths, we don't know. We don't provide them now. That is only on a very small scale to the astronomers within the Netherlands, but it's basically only one institution. Later this year, a lot of institutions, at least all the universities, will have access to this resource, but we're very curious if and in what manner and what volumes they're going to take this up. We'll have to wait and see about it, but like I said, the IP connectivity is still the basic service that we deliver on the network layer. If you look at the other layers, the other type of services, there's basically 4 categories in which you could put them. We've got security based services, we've got AAI, authentication, authorization type of services, we've got content delivery services, and we've got collaboration type of services. And within these 4 categories, you could place the next bullets on these slides. So for instance, we've got a video portal. Elise showed that portal in the previous session. All our end users can upload their videos to that platform, and it's a platform for high-end video content. That means we try to standardize there on MPEG 1 and MPEG 2 type of video. We've got conferencing services, like I'm sure most of the other NRENs have as well. ServKit, I'll not go into that because Elise showed it already. We've got a ServNet search engine, which could bring you to the question, why would you if everybody's using Google? But this is a search engine that tries to get a good index of the websites of the institutions that connect to our network, and so it's more focused than the search engines that are used by the general public. So that we still see quite some use for that. Of course, we've got mirror services, both HTTP based, like for instance a 2-house mirror, as well as FTP mirror services, and authentication services. And some of you may have been here at other sessions where at least Klaas Wieringa, a colleague of mine, has been talking about eduroam, which is our main authentication service at the network layer. And then, of course, we've got another one at the application layer, which we call ASelect. There has not been very much mentioning about it at this conference, but maybe you know of the service, and I'll not go into the service too deep in this session because it's about another issue. But if you would like to hear more about it, just ask me or one of my colleagues, for instance, at the gala tonight. And like I said, we've got a number of security services which are being called search services on this slide. And we make a binary distinction, you could say, between all these services. It's either they either fall in the category of wholesale services, or they fall in the category of end-user services or retail services, as it says here. The difference lies in the audience, in the target group for the kind of services. But the difference is also very important for the model that I'm presenting in this talk. So I would like to go into that. Wholesale services are provided on request and with the consent of connected institutions. Main reason for that is the fact that there's often a financial relationship between ServNet and this institution when it comes to these type of services. Examples are the IP connection. If an institution wants to upgrade from 1 gig to 10 gig, you would understand that there's a financial component associated with it. And that's why we call it a wholesale service. That is, we provide it to an institution and not to an end user. And other examples are the MX fallback services and our eduroam services. Eduroam has nothing to do with tariffs and those kind of things, but it has to do with regulations. For instance, if you as an institution allow your end users to connect to the network at another institution, at another university, or for instance, like here on a conference, and you authenticate these users before they get access at this other university or at this conference venue. Then you're also responsible for the acts and the behavior of these people at this university or this conference. So you have to make some arrangements between the institutions, and we have a framework with that with an EduRoam, and that's basically the reason why it's not an end user service. We consider it a wholesale service. And then on the other hand, we've got the end user services, or retail services, like we also call them, and they require intervention or consent of the institutions. So each end user can apply for them individually, and we'll provide them with these services. Examples are listserv. Any end user, any of those 800,000 end users, can apply for a listserv list, and we'll provide them with that type of service. Same goes, of course, for the HTTP and the FTP mirror services, as well as for the ServKit. And ServKit is the CD-ROM on which we provide a lot of knowledge, instructions, and tools to the end user community. Well, like I said, the type of service, either wholesale or end user, is quite important, both for the scoping of customer requirements. It makes quite a difference whether you're looking at institutions or whether you're looking to end users. If you want to scope if you want to scope customer requirements, it's also important for decisions that you need to make during the lifecycle process, and it's also very important, of course, but that's inherent for organizing feedback. And maybe you don't understand why I'm saying this now, but I think you'll understand better as soon as I come to the model, because these are important input elements in the model. So what is the ratio for having a policy on lifecycle and portfolio management? Well, there's a number of them. First of all, and also there I'm quite sure that we're not the only NREN that's experiencing this. Quite sure you all do. The average NREN customer base, so universities, polytechnics, research institutions, they're becoming ever more critical towards the NREN service portfolio. And that's basically quite a logical development now that high-speed connectivity and associated services are mission critical for much of the institutions. IP was nice to have 10 years ago. It's still nice to have, of course, but it's also mission critical. It has evolved in that way. And that makes it a logical development that institutions look at you as an NREN in quite a different way, and you have to accommodate for that. And then on the other hand, and that's also an important trend, but I think that's a little bit, the situation is not the same for each NREN, because the situation in each country differs on this aspect, and that's the fact that commercial ISPs are closing the gap, both financially, technologically, and when it comes to services, they're closing the gap with NRENs. That's something that we see within the Netherlands. We have seen universities, no, they're not in the room, but they're at the venue. Representatives from this university were here in the room about an hour ago, but even if they were now, I would have been saying the same thing. But they recently did conduct a survey, and maybe I should know it was a technical university, one of our biggest ones. They did a survey about the possibilities that there might be to obtain similar services as that we provide them with from commercial ISPs, which is not bad because it keeps us sharp, but it's a development that we did not see 10 years ago. We didn't see it 1 year ago, but we do see it now. So that brings us to the conclusion that the NREN portfolio, the NREN service portfolios, should align well with both existing as well as future customer requirements. So that's basically the ratio. But then that's easier said than done, of course, because we face at least one serious obstacle since service development within NRENs has traditionally been public funded. That's also the case within ServNet. We have, like I said, infrastructure being paid by the government. We do that within 3 different type of innovation projects. They're all public funded, and hence a technology push orientation is not uncommon, not within ServNet, but I'm quite sure that's the same for many NRENs. And then there's a serious threat, of course, since a demand pull orientation, so going to the other side of the scale, would probably not stimulate innovation. there would probably lack of that way of acting would probably result in a lack of differentiation with commercial ISPs. If we would just listen to our customers, what kind of services do you want, and then start providing these kind of services, what would differentiate us from a commercial ISP? Where would our ratio for existence be in the longer term? So that's a threat, and a second threat, and in our case maybe even more important since we're quite dependent on public funds, is the fact that if we would lose this focus on innovation and on technology, then, well, the government would also pose some questions on our raison d'etre. Like it says here, funding bodies would not see any role anymore, probably, for the role of an NREN such as SurfNet is. So that's a major threat on that side. So what we need then is a model for LCPM, for lifecycle and portfolio management, that avoids the pitfalls of a demand pool organization. That's the pitfall that I just mentioned, no differentiation with commercial ISPs. It should also avoid the pitfalls of a technology push orientation. That's basically the pitfall that we're currently all in. That is, we'll provide service, we'll develop service, and then provide them to our customers, and hope and pray maybe that they will adopt them, but we're never sure because we didn't start developing these service and asking our customers at the same time what they were actually needing. So this mismatch between the two often exists. We also need a model that allows for input and feedback from customers at the various stages of service development. And that model should, of course, preserve the valuable orientation on innovation and technology that exists within NRENs in order to remain valuable for funding bodies. Before going into the model, because that's the next issue, I think it's important to make a distinction between these two things: lifecycle management on the one hand and portfolio management on the other. There's at least two definitions, because you could see them as two different processes, but they're two different processes which are part of one model, you could say. Lifecycle management is a more internal process. It evolves around one particular service that you develop, and it's defined here as lifecycle management steers the process in which a concept, an ID, evolves into a new service, including the ensuing production phase and the phase in which a service is closed down. Well, that's quite a logical definition, I think, of lifecycle management. And then on the other end, there's portfolio management, part of the same model, but quite a different process, because it's about steering the process that should result in the end in a well-balanced and well-aligned set of services offered to the connected institutions. So when it comes to lifecycle management, you look at individual services that you develop, whereas when it comes to portfolio management, you look at the full range of services that you provide, both the network services and all the add-ons that we provide to our customers. So what's a lifecycle? I'm sure you've seen these kind of pictures before. It's basically the start of a service, the production phase, which is the fourth phase in this model, and the service shutdown. And before those three phases, you often have some sort of an impact analysis in which you look at all kind of things that are relevant for the next phase, being the service development. So you look at the tariff model, for instance, at the specifications of the service as you would like to develop it, but also to the question: are we going to build it ourselves, or should we subcontract it? And if we have the service, should we be managing it ourselves, or should we subcontract that as well? Those kind of questions are part of the phase of impact analysis. And then on the left side on the screen, you notice I'm going the other way around. You have a phase which is kind of mixed. It's both technology scouting as well as the scoping of customer requirements. It's different things, but they're being done at the same time, you could say. Technology scouting mainly by people with technical responsibilities within the NREN, and scoping of customer requirements, basically by, in our case, the two outlets. I myself work for the account advising department, which is responsible for the services that we provide to the institutions, for the wholesale services. And Elise, for instance, who talked before in this room, is working for the other department, the other outlet department, which is responsible for the retail services, and their target group is basically the end users. So if you're thinking about a model about for these two processes, and in particular for lifecycle management, GoNoGo moments are essential steps in this lifecycle. You need to have some formal moments in which someone approves of something at a certain time based on some sort of input. And that can be different kind of things. In the different stages, you see that sometimes it is a plan, like for instance, a research study, the service development plan that you have from the phase impact analysis to the service development phase, and also the portfolio moment. Number 4 is basically a plan, is something that you can read, that you can look at, while other moments, number 3 and number 5, for instance, are not documents. They're not visible, but they are formal moments. And this is a big change when it comes to service development, looking at the situation like, for instance, 2 years ago with ServNet, and now, because at that time, all these moments were implicit, and I'm quite sure that in many NRENs, these kind of phase changes will be more or less implicit. And we've made it, we formalized the phase changes by describing them, organizing a structure around them, arranging for the right input from the users, and also by providing some templates for the people that have to, like for instance, that have to write the plans, or that propose the idea to come up with a service. Then you need a document, some sort of a checklist of all the things you have to deal with, and all the questions that you have to provide an answer to. But these are basically the 5 go-no-go moments, and I'll come back to them later. If you look to the other issue, because this was the previous slide was basically about the process of lifecycle management. If you look at portfolio management, it's, like I said, part of the same model, but you could say that the phase transitions in the model, the 5 that you just saw, have potential impact on the service portfolio that you provide to your customers, and hence require a formal portfolio decision. So if you would go back at number 3, of course, you see that is the moment where you start a service, and well, it's quite logical that that moment, once you make that decision, that changes the number of services that you offer, that changes the range of services within your portfolio. So you could say that is a moment that's a decision that has impact on the portfolio that you're providing to your customers. So that would also be the moment in which you have to make this formal decision and interact with your customers about it. Well, answers to the questions, the 2 questions are quite essential within ServNet when it comes to portfolio decisions. And at the first and the second moment, that's the moments in which you're still in the development phase. The basic question is there any surplus value if ServNet would develop this particular service? So that's also the moment when you look at what's happening in the commercial sector. What are ISPs doing, and can we really make a change? Can we really make a difference here? Are we able to provide something to our customers that the market is not being able to? Or maybe there could be another reason for that, like for instance, our user constituency could have that specific demands that as well could be a ratio for developing a certain service. But it has to be, it is an answer that has to be answered at, it is a question that has to be answered at that moment. And then at numbers 3, 4, and 5, that's in the phases where you have decided to start developing a service, and at moment number 3, you have to decide, are we going to deliver this service to our customers? Because if you start developing a service, You don't necessarily have to provide this service to your customers. That's, like I said, a formal decision. It's number 3. And also at number 4 and 5, we have to address the question, is there any surplus value if ServNet delivers this particular service? So in that case, we may have developed a certain service, but we could also subcontract, for instance, the delivery of the service to one of the institutions, one of the universities, or to a commercial party who could deliver the service to our customers. So if it comes to the management of the life cycle, the question would then be who takes these portfolio decisions that are on the bottom of this slide, the numbers 1 to 5 again. The most logical way to resolve that question would be just to follow the money and ask yourself the question, who is paying for the resources that we're allocating at this certain stage? And if you would do that, like I said, it's quite logical. So we have been doing that over the last couple of years. It would more or less look like this. So in the first phases, it's basically public money, public funds that you allocate in order to do the research in these stages of impact analysis and especially service development. And as soon as a service becomes a production service, it's being paid for by the customers that we have. So that's basically the third and the fourth phase. But then if you would do that, you would give a say to the government bodies mainly in the first 2 phases. And you would be delivering services that you would be developing services that probably they would like because you would have interacted with them primarily. And then there comes moment number 3 in which you have to make this decision. Will we start offering this service to our customers? And if you do that, well, the customers will have to answer the question, is this really a service that we need? So this is the imminent tension that I showed on one of the first slides between the technology push orientation that you will see when you use this model in the first 2 phases versus a more demand pull orientation that you would require in the third and fourth phases of the model. And this is not going to work. This is basically the reason why we started thinking about another model. This results in the mismatch that I talked about. So what do you need? Well, at least you need continuous feedback at every stage, at every portfolio decision. You have to go back to the first phase in which scoping of customer requirements is being done, as well as the technology scouting. But you also need a process in which both the internal organization, and that's in the lower part of this model, as well as the external organization, that is the customers, can have a say during these different portfolio decision moments. If you look at this, I would assume it's not completely logical because there are all sorts of acronyms in this, but it's not that difficult. The INDI meeting is important in this model. It's a monthly meeting in which the department heads from the 2 outlets within ServNet and the factories within ServNet, that are the departments that are responsible for our middleware services, our advanced services, as well as our network services. They come together and they discuss the status of the different TA projects. TA stands for Technology Assessment, as well as the SD projects, and that stands for Service Development. They discuss the different phase changes. They discuss the status of the things that happen within these innovation projects. And they could come up with proposals for portfolio decisions numbers 1 and 2. And they would bring those decisions, those proposals, up to the portfolio meeting, which is a meeting that is being held twice a year. It's basically a management meeting, general management meeting within ServNet. And then there's the other portfolio decisions, number 3, 4, and 5. Like I said, that's not about innovation. That's the phases in which the customers are paying for the services. So they basically only are relevant to the exploitation. And that's more or less the same department heads. It's more or less the same people that could make these kind of proposals, but they're wearing a different hat in that case. And they could also bring proposals to this bi-yearly portfolio meeting. And decisions are being made there. So we've got monthly meetings, but all the decisions about the portfolio are being made on a bi-yearly basis. We don't know yet if that's enough. It seems for now, because service development takes a very long time, and changes in the portfolio are not the things that you want to do every month, for instance, because you also have to communicate those kind of things to your institutions. So a bi-yearly meeting seems fine, but we're not exactly sure about it. What we're certainly not exactly sure about is the external input. That's maybe the most important thing in this model, as you may assume from the previous slides, because that's basically what has been missing over the last couple of years, and what we hope to address with this model, because into this portfolio meeting should be all kinds of input from the external environment within ServNet, and then again this distinction between wholesale services and retail services becomes important. First, we have a user board, not since many years, quite recently in fact. That consists of representatives, ICT managers, basically from the universities that are connected to our network, as well as from many research institutes. At this moment, we have installed this user board mainly because we needed input for the new generation of our network, but we're thinking about, well, this network will become operational, like I said, in a month, and then after that we would like to see this user board focusing on the other issues, so not anymore on the network, or maybe also on the network, but we would like to have them focus more on the services that we provide, because it is the right people that we can interact with then, and they seem quite eager to have these kind of meetings with the ServNet management. So that seems to be a big help when it comes to the wholesale services. We also hold yearly consultation meetings with representatives of specific segments, and sometimes it's not yearly. For instance, with the universities, we have a quarterly meeting. With the Institutes for Higher Education, I believe it's once a year. And with the academic hospitals, it's also once a year. But we meet with representatives, also the ICT managers mainly there. So quite different groups than the groups that Elisa was talking about. Those were the end users. But these are basically the ICT managers. But you get a real good picture from them if you, like for instance, we've got 8 academic hospitals in the Netherlands. If you have the 8 ICT managers from those hospitals around the table and you ask them what kind of services would you need, not only now, but in a 2 years or in a 5 years time frame, you get really valuable input. And then, of course, we've got a group of 5 account advisors who frequently visit the main customers in order to learn their requirements and wish list. And that's quite easy in a relatively small country in the Netherlands. It never takes you more than 2 hours to visit a university. And most universities are within half an hour train distance. So we visit them quite a lot, and that also provides you with a lot of input. But then, of course, that's one-to-one input. But it's a valuable input. And on the retail services side, well, Elisa mentioned that, so I'll not go into that. But we have a user panel, quite a large group of end users that are willing to provide us with input. We've got an annual end user survey, and we've got a number of user communities providing valuable input on those type of services. But this is something that we're still thinking about, still working on. It's definitely not going to look like this a year from now. Some concluding remarks. Well, we will have some first experiences with the model in 2005, especially with the internal processes, and that's going quite good. We're also thinking, not only thinking, we also plan to publish these experiences to the NREN community. There are some plans, maybe some of you have heard of that, to start a TNREN task force on this issue, on LCPM issues, and we would be more than willing to publish, for instance, the checklist that we use if we want to start a particular service, or when we plan to close down a particular service, and all other kinds of things that have a relationship with these processes and this model within that constituency, within that community. But like I said, it's only a plan to start a task force. We'll have to wait and see about that. And when it comes to the external input, well, like I said, we don't have very much experience with that at this moment in time, but we think we will gain it, and we're happy to share these experiences with you. The emphasis is currently mainly focused on developing a model that facilitates the external input, because it's the main input that was lacking in the previous model. And well, last thing I mentioned already, inter-NREN exchange of experiences is being supported by Terena, which I think is a good thing, because we're not the only NREN, I've noticed that, and certainly here over the last couple of days, who is thinking about these kind of issues, who's developing these kind of models. We all are, because we all have this problem, this change that we have to make, and there's not just one model, but this is a model that seems to work for us, and I think it's quite important to interact on these different models and to learn from each other. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Walter, for a very interesting talk. We are actually running slightly behind time, so if anybody has a very quick question, I think we've got time for one. Any questions?
Hi there, it's just a quick question with regards to the pricing of the services. Do you work on a cost recovery basis, or do you actually look to make a profit from the services that you sell?
Now we're a company, but we're a not-for-profit company. So at the end of the year, the results should be zero. But there are some services that we charge for, and so we make some money, and we use that money to develop other services, like for instance. But no, we're certainly not a company in the sense that we're trying to make a profit with the services that we provide. Main focus is the customers and customer satisfaction, that is, yeah.
Thank you very much, Walter. So the next talk is from Pekka Linna, who works for Funet, the Finnish NREN. He works in customer relations, but also performs a management support role in the organisation's move from a non-profit to a not-for-profit. And his talk is going to be about the experience of the Finnish backbone in its transition from shared initiatives to services.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Dale. Yeah, it happened again, by the way. You say I'm from Funet, and then you see that it says CSC, but so the company is CSC and the network is Funet, and we use either one, total random. If things go fine, these presentations are supposed to complement each other. So that as you heard Walter talking about, let's say, normal production type of services, where the NRN delivers something as a service, and then that is somehow utilized during many years by the NRNs. Then I'm trying to look at different type of a color group of different services, which we call development cooperation, which is having here a far more national local connotation than a normal international one. And for those of you who came here for the original title, who found that to be the appealing one, yes, it's still the same one, but I was kind of getting the remark to make it more official, so I changed a bit. This will be somewhat of a repetition in the beginning, because as you heard from quite many talks, especially today, there is a certain challenge, and we share that, I think, quite at large. And then I will talk about our specific solution, and then end with some conclusions. And this is the repetition part. Like I think in quite many places that what actually I think it was Heather who was saying it, like no contracts in Internet 2 and until what, 2 or 3 years ago or something like that, because there was just a community that wanted to do things together. So that's exactly what we had. That we had a shared initiative that was starting with that there was a centralized supercomputer, and the universities needed to have access to it. So then there was a birth of an initiative for a national network. Then, of course, the same happened as all over. There was 1990s coming with the Finnish network being connected to the internet at large, and then www, and the rest is history. So that suddenly the organization that I was later to join realized that the interesting and fascinating project that they did with friends was suddenly a mission-critical service for universities. And then, of course, we have a system of universities and polytechnics. We had polytechnics joining as well. So from 20 organizations, research universities into 50, then research institutes into 80. So it was growing and becoming more important. At the same time, what seems to be kind of a natural development, also the pack of services started to grow thicker. So that there was this, let's say, first crisis, you might say, that you start to be able to give bandwidth, and then there was the idea that, like, okay, maybe we could support the utilization of that bandwidth a bit more than just expect that there's some physicists who, of course, want to use it. And then there was coming communication and content production support. But let's say with the same atmosphere, at like being a centralized place where you hire people who know how to do things, and they will find their own contact network in the universities, and then good things will emerge. Like, that's how we saw the internet being born, so that's how we will see all the good things being born. And we were like all over the place. Then, however, times change. There are some unfortunate bubbles that sometimes break down, and we had a, let's say, clear effect, at least it feels like that when there was the huge hype of late 1990s, and then there was like for example, our dear child Nokia was losing its value, and then suddenly it no longer was so that the ever more expensive FUNET service was self-evident, and that like there started to be this like accountability pressures. So like two types, as you can see from the sheet, there was a question of like, okay, we have been putting loads of money in, and we are putting loads of money in, and what's happening with that money? We want to have some kind of more explicit declarations of the results. And then the influence side was another factor. That it used to be really, I would say, peaceful and nice, that we got roughly half of the money from the central government and half of the money from the universities, and then no one was asking what we do about it, basically, because like we were collecting the FUNET tax, and then we were able to do intelligent things with it. But that, however, was not enough anymore. So we needed to not only report, but also give more influence for the actual customer organizations. And then, because of this kind of wakey situation, there was waking up, luckily, and we started to try to find ways to react to these both pressures. So, and to go, how to say, with all respect to the people who had been active at that time, so I'm going a bit deeper into what kind of need there actually was, because we had quite a big challenge in also inside the organization to start tackling the need, because there had been this, like I said, individual partner network. So that if you were, for example, active with multimedia, then you had located people who were active in multimedia questions in at least a certain amount of the customer organizations. And if you were talking to exactly those partners, they most probably said that the service is of high quality and extremely flexible, because having, if I put it a bit too far, no managerial processes, it meant there was always individual choice of if we will go into a project or not. So then that meant that you could say yes to things that you would say no in a more systematic approach. So then there were like these invisible immediate partners that were satisfied, but because if we talk with CIOs or rectors, or not to talk about the Minister of Education, they would not be in multimedia projects. So they could not see the satisfaction and high quality and flexibility. So we need a system that better articulates also to other levels, not only to the actual working partners, what is being done. And then the portfolio side is rather clear, I think, that when you have this, we have, depending on the way of counting, because we do also supercomputing and stuff, but between 20 and 30 people working in the networking and the multimedia questions. And it was an expert organization, so then even the reporting of what had been done was not that well developed, because everybody was an expert. So being able to express the goals of the coming coming year or 2 years or something like that was actually not the practice. It's been implemented in the last 4 to 5 years that you have like development discussion and setting goals and stuff like that. So the management did not actually know what was trying to be achieved, and also then could not see if it was achieved or not, could not evaluate if the goals were valuable. So the problems of making prioritizing decisions was pretty tricky. And then, okay, kind of problem is there, solution. I'm here nicely saying that what Walter was talking about for half an hour and a bit more is the first part here. That we actually needed to see what kind of services we are doing, and how we did it was that, like, if we bill someone, then I guess we give a service. If we have a contract, then I guess we have a service. If our servers respond from the outside, we can guess there's a service. Or like if we locate a machine, then we check if there happens to be a service in that one. So we were really like having to run around and find what we actually give outside to all kinds of partners and customers. And then grouping them and making it into a structured portfolio. But like I'm saying, that it's fairly easy with the pack that Walter was elaborating, because that you can grasp them quite fast. But then we had these multimedia and user administration side, where we were doing things that clearly were valuable, but we couldn't kind of make a model on what we actually are doing, what the relation with the customers is. And we did have attempts with like pretty much the same as what Walter was describing, this kind of innovation testing, piloting, production, and then of course forgetting the phasing out the end part, but that always happens. But it was not so crucial here because the model didn't work. Because actually when we were having a development project, and like you can see from the last one, that with the development project was actually for the development of something in the customer organizations. So they were asking, can we give some kind of technical support because they want to experiment, because they want to learn. And then we were trying to then model that as if we were there developing our product, which totally doesn't make, it was not true. So like it makes sense to a certain extent, but we made beautiful models, and then we realized that, like, okay, we were asked to support in building up a gateway, and then we were like, are we now going into gateway business? No, we were supporting universities that were experimenting with it because they wanted to learn. So just something different. And that's why I call it here development cooperation. Then we realized that there's a certain need for having another type of system that would need to be transparent for us and outsiders, that would need to be communicative in a way that it's not just internal, it's also supporting customer communication, that when we approach someone, then that audience is on the track what we are trying to say. And as a result of these, we would have, putting them in brackets, managed customer influence, because you don't want to have customer influence in a way that they decide fully what you do, because then you will soon be in problems, but that you will have influence, you can process it in a managed manner, and then you can make decisions. And of course, like as a kind of result of this, you would then have, in the beautiful, perfect world, a portfolio that fully meets the needs of the customers and even the needs of tomorrow. And then you would have not a feeling of dissatisfaction, but you would have commitment in giving further feedback and full willingness to pay. And one of the most important things is then also that you would have a possibility to shut down services successfully, because when we are practically in a situation where no new money comes into the house, but there are new needs that we need to address. So then we need to shut something down. And if we don't have a system for that, then the customer communication becomes very heavy and loady. And then when we finally find out that this one can be shut down, then we still make far too many customers very, very annoyed by the decision. So this system and the communication part of it should somehow be able to tackle that as well. We have happened to have kind of like as a relic of the old times a tool in our hands, and that's because it started as a project, the whole network, and then when it was turning into a service given by CSC to the customers, then not the ones who had been active, especially the people, like the CIOs who had been doing the heroic deeds in creating the whole network, didn't want to just go home. So they were turned into, from a project and project steering group, into an association, kind of a customers club, and then the working committee of the association. And then that is the formal customer interaction structure that we have. Formal in the sense that it's existing, and kind of non-formal in the sense that it doesn't have any power. So it's as if able to decide on something, but then we promise to listen but not necessarily hear what they say. And that actually relates to a problem that I will come back to later. But then when trying to implement this new system, then this was a tool that was there, like, to the hands. And thus there comes the system, and I'm really proud because I've been envying the picture that Walter is always showing. So now I also have a picture. I will go a bit in more detail into the different ones, but the main idea, that's time scale like this, and then some other scale like this. I think at least organizational hierarchy scale like this. So there's a faraway vision at, like, what is the thing that you're going to do. Then there's steps, and that means that, like, steps in the customer organizations. That there's some kind of phase, 1, 2, 3, something. And then there's preconditions, which I will explain in more detail. And then finally, services is the thing that we do. So all of this is built in order to, I point out here, so like we would know what we should have in this pack. Then all the things that we don't do needs to be somehow addressed as well. And we have the luck, or maybe not all of you think it's a blessing, but we have national strategies that the key actors, the people who make funding decisions, at least they quite strongly believe in those strategies. So that's a point where we can relate to by now identifying from their parts that relate to the kind of change that we want to support to take place in the customer organizations. Or then in the near future, we can start also like kind of filing in that we identified a vision, we identified some kind of added value, some kind of goal, some kind of change that could take place in university and polytechnics. And then about the language, then we should speak the language of the rectors, the CIOs, and the ministry. Like CIO is kind of small in the brackets, depends on how big the university is or polytechnic. And then we made kind of like academic exercise this spring. We were trying to see what kind of this development cooperation type of services we have. And they were clearly at the moment in the field of multimedia, all kinds of things, and then on the user administration side, where we want something to change in the customer organizations. And we took only one slice. We took multimedia production support services. And then we identified that there are other questions that need to be solved, like distribution of multimedia content, then storage, etc., etc. But those are not here. This exercise was only tackling how do you reach a situation where teachers and researchers have the necessary up-to-date multimedia material available easily and cost-efficiently with acceptable quality. So it's kind of like there would be happy teachers who use, somehow they get it easily. And that's the one, how many, 5 minutes?
No, I think we need to reposition your mic, actually.
Oh, sorry. Shall we put it on this side? It's better? It should be. It's away from my shirt. Shall I put it a bit higher up? Okay. Have you understood or heard anything that I said when it was doing the... Okay, some. Okay, good. Yeah, so talking to those who give the money with some kind of added value end goal. And then talking to the ones who actually are there where the work is done on what kind of steps can you identify with us. That like now you don't, now you are like in the prehistory. Now you're doing things in an old-fashioned way. Now you're not utilizing the possibilities that are there. And if there's this kind of a goal, you can't just jump. But is there some kind of reasonable steps that you would go through when we support that change? And then, of course, like you would do that with people not in a ministry, but in the actual customer organizations, in this case, multimedia experts, but then also the information management level. And then when this picture on the steps has been created, then you can also, with that, speak in a more concrete way to higher decision makers. Like not start from there, not ask from them what the steps are, but when you've defined them first, then you can also illustrate in a more concrete way what it would mean to go towards the vision. And in this like multimedia production support services type of development cooperation, we identified 3 different steps. So like first, like we give this kind of full package, that we do everything. We said like, hi, do you need something? And then the organizations themselves do the production, and then that they start partially outsourcing. And this was based on the idea of like adopting the new possibility, but then always having to take scalability into account. That we can't serve 80, and then that like the central organization in the university can't serve 20,000 teachers or like 10,000 teachers, the biggest one. And so that like there needs to be kind of getting more actors in the following steps. And then the preconditions means that like we try to have a talk with the local actors on what is needed to be able to successfully function in a certain step or to be able to move into the step. And then, as you notice, there comes in the trying to keep this model as simple as possible, but still that it's able to give a proper picture. One could question if there should be a step and a transition phase in between. But then you start to have overly complicated model easily. So here's this kind of going into step 2 and like kind of functioning with the culture of step 2. Do I have certain minutes? Okay. And then of course like you go more and more to the floor level. You more and more talk about what is needed, like in a custom organization. And then here's like roughly what we identified. That like first you need to be able to somewhat understand what is being offered, because we can offer it with centralized funding, kind of marketing stage. But like if we come and say, hey, we could like give you like make digital videos that you can then like send over IP, then they would need to be able to understand what we actually are offering. That's the precondition there. And then if organizations do themselves, it's certain production skills which differ from if they purchase services from outside. It's a different set of skills, and even like that step 2 is of course like equipment intensive as well. And then there's like a somewhat of a like raw draft on the services that like, and this is history. We also have identified that like, yes, this we did something like 5 years ago, but we don't go anywhere to digitalize material or to actually like take over the whole production. At like we used to have this at like enthusiastic person was calling us and saying that we would really like to you to come here and make a digital video on something, and we said, yeah, sure, great. And then we had people who could use the cameras, and like we had production planning experts, etc., etc. But now like retraining new tasks. Okay, I'll say, yeah, maybe here. So then when they produce, then there's a variety of types of supporting the gaining of the know-how and maintaining of those abilities. And as you can see, there's like this relating to technologies or relating to like more into how to do multimedia production. And there's, of course, we try to change within that from actual training into exchange of best practices. So like we go from an educational organization into a coordinating organization. And maybe like if like a conclusion, because they might shut me down any minute. So then here one, which is that when we did this model building with the person who's running the multimedia team, then this Vesa said during the analysis that whoa, now I actually suddenly understand when we did this testing of different kinds of technologies, and we gave those reports to customer organizations, and they were not interested. Now I understand, because they were not there, of course. Like, why would they care? Because they were not planning to purchase anything. They were just like throwing them away. So we stopped with it. And now he said, okay, it's clear we have to start again. And was then like checking, and yes, there's huge interest. So like now we start again with that. So it even works. And then here there comes kind of good news and bad news. There comes a bit more work of different type, because now it's about buying services. So we do unofficial, at the moment, benchmarking, which like was even not noticed typically. We, on a website, we have a list on providers that we've used and that we have found to be good, reliable, etc. In workshops, we ask people to tell about regional providers, and then suddenly noting that, hey, this is actually that we are benchmarking places where the organizations could outsource their production to. And then, because like how to support and get away with it, then as you can notice that like, because it's only partial outsourcing, then partially they still like keep the production role, so we can't get rid of all the support that relates to that, but more and more turning it towards the coordination, because they know already there's no need for actual training, but to keep the exchange of knowledge and know-how going on. And then some conclusions. It's kind of like, how to say, I might be embarrassed. We had the official meeting of the association last week, and this didn't fit on the agenda. So it's kind of like, how to say, results did. And what we actually did was that we realized that we are such amount behind that we were actually presenting the set of services in the same way that Walter did to you, to our customers at large, for the first time. And that then, of course, took all the time, and there was no possibility for showing some kind of product management systems. But then we we partially got where we wanted to get to, which is that we got a lot of feedback, a lot of reactions, a lot of wishes expressed, and a lot of needs, and like also non-needs, in the sense of like, why do you do that? We don't need it. And now, luckily, when we have some kind of way of, in a structured manner, to approach the pressures, then we wish to be as successful as I was saying in the beginning. We think that we learned something, which is that the model is somewhat complex, like they tend to be, but also that this is definitely not only relating to multimedia or multimedia production, but all kinds of services where you want the change to be out there and not have a production development in-house, but you want to support someone else to do things in a new way, then this model would make sense. But it's pretty hard to actually reach on all the levels the relevant partners, because there are quite many, and they also do talk in a totally different way. And we have a limited amount of people that then would need to always address different types of audiences, and that's a bit of a challenge. Also, in-house, we can't do the translation of our activities without the participation of quite many different people and quite many different types of people. So like, for example, a person like me can't come up with what services would be without the multimedia experts. But in the first meters, they don't know at all what I'm talking about, what kind of model I'm trying to here talk about and create. So it's a challenge also internally. And then, of course, like what I was saying, that I would come back to the small problem with the association is that because there's no actual formal representation obligation, but it's this kind of a club where those who had interest wanted to be in. So they are not accountable. So, and thus, if we talk with the working committee, 8 organizations, 8 people of 80 organizations, and then we think that like now they have been well in this process, it doesn't mean that the 8 organizations actually have heard anything, or that the rest of 72 would have any, because there's no way of being somehow responsible for the other 80. So actually we need missionary work. We need to run around, explain the whole thing, get the feedback from the field, and we can't use this like easy representational structure. So we need resources, especially because if you want to use this same type of model in other services as well, then we need to have the analysis and the mission work. But I would be stopping there, and I would be giving the floor to you. You can give applause at least.
Thank you very much, Pekka, for a very interesting view, a very transparent view, I think, into an organisation that's attempting to transition. There's time for some quick questions if anybody would like to ask any.
The idea about helping users doing their video productions, how did that come about? Was that the users, or did some clever guy invent it down the hall, or how did that come about?
Technology push. Maybe like Janne, who's from CSC as well and has a longer organizational memory than I have, might say that I'm fully wrong, but I've been reading all kinds of old reports and trying to trace down the same question, at how did it come? But I have the impression that there's really this motivation was that there's bandwidth. Let's like support content production so that there would be usage also in the future as much as possible, not customer request, not the need that was coming from there, but identifying a pipe and a technology and thinking that kind of like it's of course a clever idea from the management that like you create the need for the bandwidth service by supporting the content production side.
Any other questions? No, well, in that case, thank you very much, Pekka. And indeed, as you pointed out, it was CSC, the organisation, and not FUNET. So apologies for the confusion. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, completing the trio of talks will be Anne Harding, who is the Network Operations Manager at HEANet, the Irish NREN. Anne has an extremely interesting portfolio of responsibilities in her job. She's responsible for network management, client support, change management, and service development evaluation, which I think is a very, very interesting cluster of activities. So she's going to give a presentation talking about the move from strategy to implementation and the implications of that for NREN product management, obviously focusing on the Irish experience.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dale. Can everybody hear me up the back? Okay. The title of this session is called "What Services Do NRENs Need to Provide?" Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to stand here and tell you you need to do multimedia services, you need to do multicast IPv6, you need to do light paths. What I am going to do is talk about the framework we have in HEANet for deciding whether or not and how we might need to do these services. So it's a view from 1,000 feet, if you like. Like Walter and Pekka, I have a quick potted history of HEANet. We're the Research and Education Network for Ireland, and we've been going for quite some time. Initially, we were established in 1984. It wasn't until 1992 that we got our first formal employee. And then in 1997, we're incorporated as a not-for-profit company, and we're owned by our clients, basically. And then in 2004, saw the development of the HEANet strategic plan. So that's a potted history of the company from a business point of view, an organizational point of view. Another way of putting it, and putting my techie hat back on, it's the story of 7 links and 2 servers to about 115 different connections and 51 servers. I arrived on the scene, I think, at about 6 servers. So there's been a great deal of growth in a very, very short time. And again, the strategic plan is a response to that. It's how to manage our reactions to such growth. I'm just going to go through the strategic planning process. What happened initially was there was a creation of a planning subcommittee, and there's representatives of the board and management of HEANet. Now, as I said earlier, the board is made up of members of our clients, so we got an easy win there, also having clients involved from the very beginning. One of the tasks of the planning process was to do an environmental analysis. There were a wide range of areas there, but I'll just go through a few because they've been highlighted by Pekka and Walter. We're not neglecting the technological aspect of what we do here. Technology advancement is very important for NRENs. So we did investigate what other NRENs are doing, what we're doing, and also what the commercial world is doing as well, because sometimes the technology they're pushing isn't the same as what we're pushing, but it is of interest to people. Also important were economic and political and competitive things. For example, we did a cost-benefit analysis of our services as compared to the commercial offerings as well. So we weren't necessarily complacent. We weren't saying, because we are the NREN, people will connect to us. Value doesn't matter. Value does matter, but other things do as well. All the way through this planning process, there was consultation, review, and evaluation, not just with clients, but actually with the staff in HEANet. The engineers on the ground floor were involved in this process. And that's very important, because you don't make a strategy and then have it sit somewhere, gather dust, and occasionally bring it out to show to your aunt or something. It's actually going to possibly change the day-to-day ways in which you work and ways in which you decide things. The outcome of this process was the strategic plan, which is intended to run from 2004 to 2007. It's got 23 different strategic objectives and actions. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 23 here. You will get to your bus. If you want to read the whole thing, it's available on our website. Download a copy, have a look. The cycle itself is quite complex, as you can see. There's lots of different areas involved, from human resources, financial, business planning, changing environment, the government priorities. Pekka highlighted in Finland that this is actually quite an important aspect. So all of these come together, they feed into each other, sometimes it's two-directional, but eventually what you get is your service delivery, your financial management, your human resource management, what you do to be an NREN and deliver services. Of course, it's not just enough to have a plan, and it's not even just enough to go along the process of implementing it. You need to review. You need to make sure you're still on track and what you're doing still makes sense. So you've got three main areas that you're doing. What are your values as a research network? And keep those in mind when you're reviewing. Are you still communicating? And how are you measuring what you're delivering? How are you measuring what your value is? How are you measuring what your services are? Right down to even purely technical measurements. So depending on the area, your review mechanism, it's not, we'll review everything every year. Different things have different cycles. So things like the organization design is not likely to change very often. But retention, retraining, and recruiting is ongoing because technology changes, services changes. So there's four main areas there you've got to keep an eye on when you're reviewing. I'm going to go through 4 of the particular objectives that we worked on in the last session. What we do is we pick a number of different aspects out of the 23 plans. We form the company into different teams. They're cross-boundary teams, so there's development engineers, operations engineers, admin, PR people, management, all working together on these different areas, even if it's not their key area of responsibility. So the first one is customer service. And the aim there was to demonstrate responsiveness to changing customer needs. Now, to fit this in with what Walter says, this would be the user, possibly the user experience, but more often it's the one associated with the money. Second is operations and services, and this is to enhance services targeted to researchers and research institutions. Again, we're taking a step further now, perhaps beyond customer, and talking to user. And this is also an area where it allows us to really get to grips with the technology aspect of what we do, but without it being purely technology push. It's technologically important, but it's driven by our research needs. Thirdly, marketing and communications. Now, you might think, why does a research network need to do marketing? You need to tell your customers what you're doing. They need to know, and you need to have good ways of doing this. So we wanted, in this particular one, to develop HEANet's market intelligence capability, which is a fancy way of saying we needed to know what was going on in our own area. not just our own area is defined not just as our customer base, not just as our users, but also our competitors, because as an NREN we have competitors, and as people we collaborate with, which is other NRENs. So that was all very, very important to bring that together. And then under management and finance, we need to evaluate the potential for outsourcing. As an NREN, sometimes you can be a little bit reluctant to consider outsourcing because we do have an opinion that we are very, very good at what we do. And I think history's proven that that's the case. But you can't just assume that that will always be the case. You have to reevaluate that for every service, every decision. Well, on the first objective, the team got together and they came up with the following recommendations. The first thing was we had to actually define what was our customer. Was customer service, obviously, it's people who are communicating with us. Well, it's not necessarily, it's a subset of them. And for our purposes, the definition of customer was computer services departments. Now, this doesn't mean that we suddenly stop communicating with end users, and it doesn't mean we suddenly stop communicating with researchers. But it does mean that to fulfill our customer service objective, we have to concentrate on the computing services departments. So some of the means that we suggested we do that were to use client visits, to actually us go out to the clients, which can happen more rarely than you think, to have workshops and conferences to keep contact. So some of this we were doing already. We already have a very popular annual networking conference, and we've also brought in different themed workshops, and we involve our computing service departments in actually giving presentations at those workshops. The second thing was we needed to improve the editorial procedures for things that for details about the services that we were offering. So one thing that was set up was an editorial panel, and for the editorial panel you need some cross skills here. You need enough technical people involved so that the service descriptions are accurate, and you also need enough people who have language skills and communication skills involved so that all of this technically accurate information can be communicated effectively and well. And we also decided we need to increase the number of fact sheets and website updates about the information that we have. Because there's a phrase, familiarity breeds contempt. We're so used to doing these services that it's very, very easy to forget you haven't told somebody about them, or you haven't told somebody about everything about them. Or if you've told them, you haven't checked that they've actually read it. So more fact sheets, more website updates and feedback and things like that were important. And then finally, we wanted to formalize service evaluation. This is again to avoid a purely technological push approach, but not to say don't do services just because they're technologically difficult. A dedicated team within existing structures was proposed. One particular proposal was that it would be made up of our Chief Technical Officer, representatives from Managed Network Services, NOC Manager, then service experts and service advocates. And one of the reasons it's important to formalize service evaluation, maybe if you're an NREN like we were, growing from quite a small company. When I joined, there were 12 people, now there's over 30. With 12 people, you can gain consensus on something pretty quickly. With 30 people, consensus can take a very long time. So sometimes people talk about procedures drawing things out. This is actually making sure that decisions happen within a very defined time period. But this idea of the service experts and the service advocates was to make sure that technical people don't get left out of this decision-making process. But the decisions have to be done on a sound basis, not just because the technology looks shiny. On the second recommendation, to do with operations and services, that was to do with researchers and funding bodies. What we decided is we have people involved in the company who have a research background. Pekka was saying that, and previously people just suddenly seem to know what it was the researchers want. Well, that's not a valid assumption. So what we need to do is we need to engage with the researchers, and we also need to engage with their funding bodies as well, because this networking, it doesn't come from nowhere, it doesn't come cheap. So if the more people who are aware of the value that the research network is giving, the better. And we also thought maybe with the researchers and funding bodies, we wanted to identify particular networking requirements for research. Because if you are a researcher, your aim and your project is what you need to do. Networking is a tool within it. It's maybe our job to make sure that we realize this tool is going to be needed. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's something which is part of what they're doing. Conveniently, since this is something that we are quite involved in, one of the conclusions of this group was that we use our involvement in the GEONT 2 project. for example, on test and measurement areas, in delivery of hybrid networks, switch networks, and everything like that. There's an awful lot of excellent work going on there, rather than reinventing wheels or anything like that, to use our involvement in GEONT 2. And then finally, we had started to develop segmented bandwidth services of the type that you'll have been hearing quite a lot about in this conference. And the recommendation of the group is that we continue with that, because that can deliver the end-to-end performance that researchers need. But to be a bit more proactive about it, not just do it as a technology thing, but do it as a service. Under marketing and communications objective, and this is the one that I was involved in, so I might get a little bit more wordy on this, we had 4 key tasks. The first one was to identify and maintain sources of market intelligence. In other words, find out what it is we know and where we know it from, so that we can continue to keep looking in the right places. So also, it was kind of different people, depending on their role and position in the company, and this is where the cross-teams thing worked very well, had a different perception of what was useful information. So if you were in operations, for example, clients were very important, because we're communicating with clients on a daily basis. They're contacting us for user support. If you're in management and you're controlling the cost-benefits analysis and everything, industry is incredibly important. What are they doing? What are we able to buy? What are we in competition with? The same with government. Other research networks or service development teams are working with them. So they all had information, but each part of the company, even though it's a small company, had a different view. So what we've got to do is identify all of these and bring them together and make sure they're maintained so that people are actually paying attention to them. The second thing was, we possibly have the problem of too much information. We had many, many different existing sources of information. We were trying to work out, what do we know about our marketplace? And realized our trouble ticketing systems had information, over a decade of entries on a file server had information, our new customer contacts database had information, all separate areas. The people working in our multimedia area had separate information. Now, we could take all of this, throw it all out, and start again with a full customer relationship management system. But we decided, instead of getting rid of something completely, work with what we have that's good, but bring it all together. So what we decided was we'd recommend a single interface to diverse data sources. As it happens, it's a search appliance in this case to bring everything together. Another important factor was the idea that we should conduct a regular user survey. We didn't deliberately come up with questions for this user survey. We just felt it was important that there was one, but that the other strategic objectives had so many questions about what it is that our users and our customers wanted to do that it was important we had one. And that this should be coordinated, as in, if the network development team wants to know something and the services development team wants to know something, that they don't bother the customers with 2 different surveys, but that we bring it all together and we have a coordinated approach to this. And then finally, we needed to develop a procedure for regular contact with end users. And this is a good example of how your strategic objectives should interlock with each other. Because earlier we decided that our customers were the computing services department, but that we still wanted to talk to end users. And here in marketing communications, we're working out how we're going to talk to our end users. And what we've come up with a recommendation on that is to work with existing computing services, because they're the key. They know what's going on in their campus network. They can put us in contact with the correct people. So what we're doing is working on a way of formalizing that. Now, it is a change, and it's not a change. It's something we've always done informally, but now to formalize it and to make sure it's routine, that's quite a challenge. Finally, on management and finance recommendations, we proposed a framework for reasons to outsource. I don't have it here because it's an incredibly complex issue. It's an incredibly complex system, and it's got plenty of those stop-go issues that Walter was talking about that are very important. But some of the basic principles that are involved in for reasons to outsource were contractual, staffing, and of course, let's not forget quality. We're research and education networks. We've prided ourselves on our ability to deliver high-quality services. If we're outsourcing it, it's still our name in front of it. We're still there. So quality is a very important thing to consider, but it's not the only one. Our proposed outsourcing procedure has 2 parts. It's got basically a flow diagram and different stop-go decision points depending on different things in it. But it also has what do you do if the answer is stop, as well as what do you do if the answer is go. because it's very easy in a linear procedure to go, that clears that step next. But what happens if it doesn't clear a step? Where do you go in your procedure then? And there also has an evaluation template for outsourced services. Because the one thing that we decided was very important was outsourcing's not an easy way out. You don't just shunt the management over there and then you don't do anything about it. You then have in your own core area a responsibility to make sure that the quality and what is being contracted for is still being maintained. So you need to evaluate your outsourced services as much as you need to evaluate your insourced ones. Well, overall, what were the lessons we learned? Because this has been going on for the implementation for nearly a year now and the planning for quite a while beforehand. The first thing is strategy is core work. When I say core work, it's as important as picking up the phone and talking to and answering a phone call from your clients. It's as important as attending conferences like this. This is core work. It's as important as designing new technologies or evaluating services. It's really, really important. And that's both the design of it and the implementation. It's not that you're the engineer sitting there typing, frantically trying to reconfigure a router and then that this is an imposition. It's not. This is supporting the reason you're sitting there able to configure that router. The other thing is it had a whole organization impact. Strategy is often associated directly with management. While management is important to strategy, everybody in the company can make contributions, and everybody in the company did make contributions to this. And this is important because the implementation affects everybody. If you take the example of marketing and communications, because of this process, we'll have a new system which everybody will need to learn to use as part of their day-to-day business to interact with our different sources of information. So it's absolutely affecting everybody on the day-to-day. These changes, people have to get used to, and it's maybe a bit better if they see where they come from. On the positive side of lessons learned as well, it's not all about change and rewriting everything and deciding we're not research networks anymore and we have to be big business. Some of the existing activities were already addressing strategic objectives, but now that we know we're doing them for strategic reasons, it actually becomes more powerful. We're not doing this because the technology is shiny. We're not doing this because we don't know why we're doing this, because everybody else is doing this. We're doing this because it is important to us as a research network. It's important for our research users. It's important for our customers. We noticed that in some cases, it was mostly formalization or streamlining that was required. There's no need to start not from scratch necessarily. If you look at your organization, even if you don't think that you're very big on processes or anything, when you start doing something the same way every time, it's a process. When you just need to formalize it a little bit more, work out what happens when the decisions that don't normally come up would crop up, and what do you do next. And then finally, information and communication are the key. There's an onus on HEANet to communicate what it is we do. We have to communicate it to users, we have to communicate it to our direct clients, we have to communicate it here to people like you. We need to find out what the clients and end users need, and I mean find out. Actually go and ask the right people. As Pekka was saying, you have your contacts. If you're not talking to the right contacts, they don't know what you're talking about. But use your contacts to get you in contact with the right contacts, if that's not too many contacts in one statement. And finally, and surprisingly, given the conference that we're at, because we're at this conference, we know technology is not trivial. But in some ways, technology is the easy bit of what we have to do as research networks. Thank you.
For a very interesting presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Up the back.
Thank you. Congratulations for the presentation. I would like to get a rough idea about the way HEANet is financed. So where the money does come from?
Shall I refer that one to my CEO? It's a mixture. Basically, large project-based things are funded largely directly by the government or through particular government projects, but also generally the client connectivity is funded by client charges. So it's a mixture.
The services?
It depends. It depends whether the services are ones that are covered under strategic government objectives and therefore would come out of the project-based things, or whether they're client ones that come out of there, or whether they can be done. Some services can be done with very little cost, if you know what I mean, as well. So.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much. I hope you've all found it as interesting as I have. And that's the end of the session.